This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to journalist James Pogue. He's going to be speaking to us about the deadly situation in South Africa. There have been open battles in the streets due to the former president Jacob Zuma being sent to prison on corruption charges. Over 300 people have been killed. We're going to speak to James, who has done extensive reporting in South Africa, specifically around groups with armed militias and the like. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please consider supporting us. Keep us going at patreon.com/popularfront. Let's start with what is actually happening right now in South Africa. Last I read, I think there's over 100 people have been killed in, open street clashes. It's like urban warfare. From some of the videos I've seen, it looks like that. What the hell is going on? I understand it's something to do with Zuma, like something to do with this one, that one, like all sorts is going on. Maybe just give us, an idea of why this is happening right now.
There's an official version of what's going on, which keeps changing, that the government has been, to put it kindly, it seems like they're trying on explanations for size, and nothing seems to be sticking. So just to give people a picture, if they haven't been following the actual measurable events, there's a grab bag of chaos that I can describe. Things kicked off when Jacob Zuma, the former president, was sentenced to 15 months in prison for defying an order by the South African Constitutional Court to appear before this commission that was investigating corruption during his tenure, called the Zondo Commission. And basically, this created a showdown in South Africa. And different people describe the showdown as between different groups, but the easiest way to look at it is actually as a showdown within the governing ANC party, which has governed South Africa since the beginning of democracy. And so, roughly speaking, there was a Zuma wing and a sort of more proper-minded and supposedly reformist wing headed by the president, Cyril Ramaphosa. And when Zuma went to prison, which was to some people a surprise, some people thought he wasn't going to turn himself in. When Zuma went to prison and was kind of surrendered himself at his lavish palace surrounded by Zulu warriors in traditional attire and all this stuff, it was a big thing. Quickly, things developed that some people began to describe as an attempted insurrection. And so kind of the kickoff point for that version of events was when the N3 motorway between Johannesburg and Durban, which is Africa's biggest port, and Johannesburg is, of course, the kind of financial and economic capital of South Africa. The N3 motorway was cut deliberately, it seems, by the burning of, I think, 39 trucks. And then stuff started to spiral very, very quickly. Durban's port was shut down. Pharmaceutical warehouses were destroyed. Lots of logistics and transportation nodes were attacked, possibly in coordinated fashion. And then looting broke out. And the looting was concentrated especially in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, which is where Jacob Zuma is from. It's the kind of traditional homeland of the Zulu people. And Zuma is by far the most significant Zulu figure to emerge within the ANC coalition. It broke out in KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, and then it spread to Gauteng, the province where Johannesburg is, to Soweto, to townships. And this became a much more sort of disorganized and chaotic moment where the big thing was that malls were looted around Gauteng and the environs of Durban. And at some point during all this, and you have to kind of forgive me because I'm not sure the dates, but at some point during the looting, there a big presence of kind of white and Indian militias began taking over the streets of white and Indian areas, particularly kind of in the region around Durban, between there and Pietermaritzburg. And this set off probably the biggest underreported thing that happened in the chaos of South Africa the last few weeks, when some reports I've read are like 39 people were murdered by white and Indian militias, usually without much kind of hesitation or ado. A lot of Black people were pulled out of cars were burned. And this has set off a very, very deep rage. And like, if you go on South African Twitter right now, I mean, the area where a lot of people were killed was called Phoenix, which is a historically Indian area. And it's the talk is really brutal. The talk of civil war, the talk of interethnic violence is very, very serious. So I know that's a lot of information, but that's a kind of quick rundown of the chaos such as we've seen it. And then we can go into what's really happening, what the government story is, all of that as we get going, I guess.
Yeah, well, one thing which is hazy to me, I know you said there's like different militias kind of coming out now, but these videos where there's open combat in the street, people are firing, there's some like insane footage where guys are just getting dropped, like getting shot dead in the street, and then other guys are like on the corner, carry on, just kind of firing. What is this? Are these like government affiliated groups, or is it just general chaos? Like, how organized is all of this?
Well, so that's the great question, right? And the government has kind of, you know, as of our talking right now, and this may change, the government first kind of came out with this phrase that what was happening was a quote unquote ethnic mobilization. And the implication of that is very, very live and intense in South Africa. The implication of it was that it was basically a move by what are often called Zulu chauvinists, which is kind of polite term for some of the tendencies within hardcore Zulu politics, but Zulu chauvinists to basically defend one of their own in the form of Jacob Zuma. That got a lot of pushback, and it just wasn't borne out by the events on the streets. Then they began to talk about what they called an insurrection against South African democracy. And that was something that has, you know, that's something that they at least have enough evidence for to have arrested some people. And so we can kind of get into what these factions are and try to piece apart what the factional infighting in the ANC is. It involves a little history, but basically the ANC is bitterly divided between a group that is more or less loyal to Zuma, but to some degree simply loyal to their own pocketbooks and political patronage, that it goes by the name the RET faction, which stands for quote unquote radical economic transformation. And RET is kind of representative of what used to be the left of the ANC, you know, which is historically backed by communists, trade unions, kind of radicals who, some of them have broken off, some of them have become wildly corrupt and basically mafia figures. Some of them, like Zuma, are sort of like populist firebrands who are also very corrupt, who have kind of presented themselves as tribunes of the people. But this group, and you can look at it, the ANC's suspended Secretary General Ace Magashule is kind of the big figure, perhaps almost as big as Zuma. And then you have this kind of collection of weirdos and jokers from this guy, Carl Niehaus, who is, I mean, well known for having faked his mother's death to try to like get out of some kind of tax fraud thing or something. I'm not exactly sure what he did, but he did fake his mother's death. And this guy, Tulani Dlomo, who was kind of Jacob Zuma's personal spy master, who did this kind of, it ran this extra legal spy ring for Zuma's personal benefit, and was sort of like a kind of nefarious figure in the earlier administration. But to give a picture, Carl Niehaus is actually interesting because he was, or until recently, he was the spokesperson for the MK Veterans Association, which MK was translation Spear of the Nation. It was the armed wing of the ANC. And the government has directly accused MK veteran groups and kind of renegade, kind of like still operating MK bands of basically like coordinating this. Like, and so they've presented evidence in the form of like WhatsApp chats and things that groups like MK, who are still radical and perhaps loyal to Zuma, and who are often like trace their dissonance with the current ANC government back to all the way back to when, you know, they wanted to end the war or end the anti-apartheid struggle by marching as an army into Pretoria and basically taking over, you know. And so a lot of them are still angry about 1994, which is something you don't hear a lot about in the American, you know, particularly the American media. I'm not sure about the British media, but in the American media, we often think of South Africa as a place where, you know, nonviolent struggle happily ended in a sort of Gandhi-like way with the emergence and a flowering of democracy. That didn't really happen. And the ANC inherited a legacy of politicized gangs, of factional militias, of tribal divisions. And all of these are still present. All of these are still present very much within the ANC itself, to say nothing of the rest of South Africa. And so I don't think there's that much doubt that there was some level of organized sabotage and organized violence. The government seems to maybe be overplaying how much that was, because in particular, by the time you got to looting in Gauteng, it was a lot of people. There's literally no doubt whatsoever that most of the looting was done by people who were simply desperate and hungry, in a place where COVID has hit South Africa, you know, probably harder than almost any country of its size in the world. And the lockdowns have been very severe. People get arrested for like drinking alcohol, for smoking cigarettes. And they had just cut, I think in April, they had just cut this sort of supplementary payment that was keeping a lot of people alive. Like literally a lot of people started to starve in May and June and go to bed hungry and things like this. And so by the time you got to Gauteng, if you saw organized violence, it was gang violence. It wasn't some organized civil war. That wasn't necessarily true everywhere. It's a little murky. And then to make it even more complicated, you know, a lot of these particularly white communities have, you know, I mean, if they were black, you'd call it a gang. They have their own kind of, we protect our neighborhood, we protect our turf, organized groups, you know, with AR pattern rifles, with AKs, with body armor, with night vision, all the stuff, right? And these guys were out in the street. I don't know if it's even going to ever be possible to get a picture of how many people were killed in violence between black looters, accused black looters, between Indians, between whites. It's going to be tough to ever get a picture of that. But there was definitely some, and we're already seeing arrests. We're already seeing, you know, video reports and things like that.
Right. Sounds very, very dodgy. What's the current situation now? I understand things kind of calmed down a little bit in terms of the open combat. But what's going on at the moment?
Well, so this might be a good moment to kind of delve into the divisions in the ANC, because so to give a quick picture and then we'll do that. As far as I know, as of when I checked this morning, I think 339 people have been killed. The roads, particularly, you know, the N3 and the N2, the big motorways, those are open again. They opened with a lot of fanfare, you know, big convoys of trucks. And, you know, Durban's port is open. The stuff that is going to be really, really tricky and that is going to impact people in ways that don't make the news is, you know, the pharmaceutical distribution warehouses in KZN are gone. Like they were burned. Almost all of the chain pharmacies in Durban, or I mean, I don't want to say this. This is something I read. I'm not 100% sure this is true. But I read a report that like chain pharmacies in Durban had been looted and targeted. And so there's very few pharmacies around. Food prices are, of course, going to skyrocket in a place where, again, people think of South Africa as a developed economy. It is in certain ways, but it is not for at least 50% of the population who live in absolutely abject poverty of the kind that you would associate with anywhere else in sub-Saharan Africa, and perhaps worse in some cases. And so the kind of the logistical and the kind of like health and simple like subsistence level needs of people in places like Soweto, which is often considered a middle-class place, but has outlying areas that are desperately poor shanty towns. Those are places that are going to be really hit hard. And those are places where the unseen effects of this are going to go on for a long time. As far as the political situation, we're probably now going to see a real reckoning in the ANC and a kind of, we're already seeing to some degree an emerging power struggle that is going to have to come to a head. And that, you know, it's not necessarily certain that South African democracy will survive, to be honest.
It's that bad, yeah? That's serious.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think this is a moment for people who, and I don't mean your listeners who are often quite up on this stuff, but this is a moment for the international community to really take stock of what's happened and failed in South Africa, and to possibly get past this idea that, you know, people loved to make Zuma into this buffoon villain who ruined South African democracy. And I'm the last person on earth who's going to get up here and defend Jacob Zuma. But the problems are not unique to him. And the problems of a single party state that has been a single party state since its founding, that is run by a party that has not by any means managed to transition from being a liberation movement to a government, go back all the way to 1994. They go back even farther. I mean, they go back to when the ANC was bitterly divided between, I mean, I don't want to go too far with this because I'm not an expert on it, but, you know, the ANC was divided even on how to end apartheid, right? And there were a lot of people who are still angry about the fact that, you know, this, you know, Marxist-inflected, egalitarian group that championed wealth redistribution basically accepted a negotiated surrender from the apartheid government that kept in place not the political structure of the country, but it kept in place the basic divisions of capital and the power of white money in the society. It allowed tons and tons of people on both sides, in fairness, but tons and tons of people who had done terrible things to get off without retribution. And, you know, it papered over tribal divisions. The ANC has often kind of presented itself to the world as a non-tribal organization. But, you know, back before the end of apartheid, people called it the Cosa Nostra, sorry, like, because it was the kind of the Xhosa mafia. And, you know, it fought a brutal internal war with the Zulu Inkatha Freedom Party, which had its own problems. But all of this stuff began long ago. And it, you know, when Thabo Mbeki kind of designed the economic reforms that came after the end of apartheid, they quickly reshaped South Africa into this kind of, you know, classic IMF-friendly model of an emerging economy, instead of the quote unquote radical economic transformation that a lot of people were hoping for, instead of this kind of egalitarian uplift. And this gets to the really tricky parts of all this, which is that when that happened, quote unquote, wealth redistribution towards the Black majority was going to be conducted by this program called Black Economic Empowerment, right? And BEE was a nice name for something that was basically, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but honestly, it's kind of true. It was basically institutionalized, a kind of institutionalized form of like how the East Bloc nations like sold off their assets and created a class of state-linked billionaires. Because what you did, and Cyril Ramaphosa, who was now the president of South Africa, was the chief negotiator with the National Party in the talks that basically led to the end of apartheid. He was the voice of Mandela, who was by that point, to some degree, largely a spiritual figurehead and a guy who was liaising with the international community and providing moral support. Ramaphosa was the chief negotiator, and Ramaphosa was also the chief beneficiary of a system that basically would allow pretty well-connected people, generally ANC figures, to get what were essentially free shares of companies. So Ramaphosa was friends with this mining executive, this guy Manel, who, he would like fly fish with and stuff. And Manel talks about this. He basically loaned Ramaphosa 25% of companies, and then Ramaphosa would get a seat on the board, and he would be expected to pay back these wildly valuable shares with dividends from the company that he was now working for, right? And so he's on the boards of all these places. He owns every McDonald's franchise in South Africa. And it's because of his political connections. And so this was kind of institutionalized corruption. That's maybe a strong word for it, but it was institutionalized unfairness that elevated a number of senior ANC figures very, very quickly to great wealth and status. And kind of allowed them to say, look, like we have an emerging Black class of some of them are billionaires. And South Africa is moving along very quickly, and it's all so thrilling, and we have democracy. But you were institutionalizing a party where political connections equaled money, and where you had all of these factions. Many of them were still armed, legally or non-legally. You had all these competing personalities. You had all these competing ethnic divisions. And it all had to take place behind closed doors, because elections in South Africa basically just confirm the ANC's power, right? And there's always noise every time there's a presidential election. Oh no, is the ANC going to lose seats? Is the ANC going to do this? But they always retain power, right? And so South Africa is... there's no other way to describe it. It is a single party state. You can call it a democracy too, but it is not a multi-party democracy. And that has had wide ranging implications. And it's going to kind of forever, unless something changes. And we may be seeing the ANC about to split. That's something that a lot of people are talking about. However, it's something people have talked about for years. And, they may also just be so entrenched that this kind of infighting is going to run the country entirely into the ground. But that's a long way of saying that I think often the Western media in particular has portrayed the current president, Ramaphosa, as this kind of saintly figure who's going to come in and try to clean things up. And I think the biggest lesson to take from this is that job might be beyond him. And he also may not have as much credibility within South Africa as people like to portray.
Yeah, doesn't sound good. It sounds like if there was ever a time for them to split, as you said, it would probably be now. I know there's been like obviously all of these street clashes, and a lot of it is affiliated with this wing of the government, that wing of the government. But what have the government actually done to try and stop these clashes, like if anything?
Well, so even that is a little confusing because, first they mobilized a bunch of police who, we don't have to go too far into the SAPS, the South African Police Service, but they arbitrarily arrested tons of people. There's shootings. The police are themselves often corrupt. There are videos of the police themselves looting. And so then they called up the army. And the South African National Defense Force was supposed to provide more or less on the spot 25,000 people. Again, as of this recording, I can't say that's not going to happen. But there's a lot of really credible questions raised by, like former generals and people in the know who are like, they don't actually have the operational capacity to do that. And so I'm not actually sure if that full mobilization that they claimed did take place. But the army mobilization is, I think, a really key thing to note here, because it looks like, hey, the government said we're bringing in the army, and then they bring in the army and things calm down, all's well and good. That's not, at least according to people I've talked to, that's not how it was seen on the street. The army, at the very first deployment of the army, actually brought more people out onto the street because they felt, even people who were not, Zuma loyalists, who weren't Zulu, none of these things that people are throwing at all these looters as accusations. These were people who were just furious that the state would bring in the army against poor people who were desperately looting. And it brought out a lot of angry people who hadn't been looting before. I don't have any numbers on that. That's just anecdotal things that people told me, but it tracks, and it tracks well with the fact that, the kind of radical firebrand outside of the ANC, who used to be the ANC's youth wing leader, Julius Malema, he repeatedly warned the government, like, hey, don't bring in the army, don't bring in the army. And even generals who are retired, and, at least one of whom I think is pretty well respected. I'm not an expert on South African ex-generals, but one former MK commander was really, really angry about this. And he was like, this is not the role of the South African army to settle an intra-party dispute. This is an absolute abuse of state power, an absolute abuse of the defense forces of a nation, because what you're doing is using this army to basically settle a political score. And I repeat that because I think that's how a lot of people on the street interpreted it. And I think that it's going to help to build, again, a lot of anger against a Ramaphosa figure who is loathed by many poor people, like truly, truly loathed by a certain wing of kind of radical-minded Black South African hates Ramaphosa and blames him for massacres. He was on the board of a mining company where a huge massacre of strikers took place, where people were, killed in mine shafts and shot in crevices. And, they blamed it on accidental fire at first and stuff. Ramaphosa was on the board for that. And people remember that. And people think of this as kind of, not all people, but a lot of people think of this as a kind of recapitulation of Ramaphosa's basic disregard for poor people and disregard for the voice of the streets.
So a lot of anger directed towards this guy.
Yeah, and it's hard to know exactly what form that will take, whether it'll take the form of, kind of further violence. It seems unlikely, at least for the moment. I think probably it will take the more immediate form of further disillusion with South African politics. And so, throughout the history of South African democracy, participation in elections, voter turnout has been falling. And, increasingly people view it as a kind of game. Again, a game largely played within the kind of opaque world of the ANC. And I mean, this is speculation that goes a little far beyond what might happen anytime soon. But Ramaphosa, who again tries to portray himself as this kind of, reformer with clean hands, the vice president he appointed in, I think, 2018, David Mabuza, is one of the most corrupt people in South Africa. There's a New York Times story from, 2018 that, describes how in the province that he governed, he used to be the education minister there and mobilized teachers to bring himself further into power. 20 ANC officials over the course of just a few short years were murdered, often just after they had spoken out about corruption. And he kind of used this massive patronage network to build a kind of power base of ANC voting delegates that made his pretty small province into a bigger force within ANC politics than Gauteng, which is, the most economically powerful and I think the most populous province in South Africa. I may be wrong about that. And so this guy used that power and a nakedly corrupt system of more or less complete patronage, like dedicated to his sole person, to become vice president of South Africa. And every vice president who has served under an ANC president has gone on to then run the state. And so, like, the crazy question about like whether Ramaphosa can maintain his legitimacy and at least enough power to effectively govern is like the people waiting behind him are not great.
Yeah, it's going to be, it doesn't sound like there's anyone coming to save anybody. You know what I mean? You were talking about these militias at the start. So you said there's like kind of an alliance or something between like white militias and Indian militias. What is that? What's going on there? Tell us a bit more.
A couple things with that. As far as the alliances go, my direct knowledge is limited to the fact that I've seen white guys and Indian guys patrolling together, and that I've heard, reports from my fixer that was happening, and I think he saw it. It's kind of interesting because that area of Phoenix, I hadn't really known much about. I didn't really place the name when I first started hearing about these killings, but it turned out that actually I had gone through there because someone I knew had actually worked in an Indian-owned shop there. And that is maybe indicative. He's pretty typically minded South African guy. And the just absolute vitriol that he said to me about Indian people was pretty shocking. And it's a reflection of the fact that there's, a lot of Black people think that Indians in South Africa are very, very racist towards them and very, very, you often hear the word sort of like high-handed, things like that. And there's a lot of resentment about that. And basically what happened, at least there, as far as I can tell, is that Indians did something that you've long heard about whites planning to do. And that I know, as I've talked to you about, I know quite a lot about sort of white logistical planning for civil unrest and how they deploy those militias. And we can get into that too. But it seems that the Indians had either been doing this for a long time or were taking a bit from the white playbook. And they blockaded the borders of the various areas. And anyone who kind of was unlucky enough to get in there, I saw a kind of long interview with a woman who was dragged from her car, put on the ground, and she heard them. She was screaming, and she heard them kind of talking about whether or not to kill her. She claimed that she had, just bought this car and she had saved up a lot for it, and that she put her whole life savings into it, and they had her watches, they burned it. And so, and that was just one report from someone who survived, right? Yeah. And so the South African police minister went there and talked rather tough, and I think a few people have already been arrested. I'm not sure if anyone's been charged with murder, but this is something that, is neither unique to that area, nor is going to go away or be diminished anytime soon in South Africa. If anything, this kind of like neighborhood or suburb by suburb militarization, essentially. I mean, lots of suburbs in South Africa just have essentially, their own mini military to police their borders in events like this. And this is only going to drive that further. It was already something that, would produce periodic killings and extrajudicial attacks and lots of racial tensions. And that it's something the government was trying to tackle. This is a massive, massive step back for that. It's going to give nothing but greater impetus to further arm South African society. And of course, the fact that I forgot to mention this, of course, the fact that lots of arms were looted during this time is going to give further impetus to that. There's an ammunition factory. I forget how many rounds, but I think 5 million rounds. I may have a decimal point wrong on that. But millions of rounds were looted from an arms depot. And it's just going to drive the society that's already essentially at war with itself further down that road.
So what is going on then with these kind of white militias? What is the mobilization looking like? Because obviously, we spoke before, and they're armed to the teeth. They're ready to go. They basically want a war to break out, from what I gathered. This is surely their moment in a very dark way, but that must be what they're seeing.
Well, so, I mean, people who listen to this or listen to the earlier interview probably already heard some of this, but it's kind of interesting. The big white militia that I was sort of traveling around with and reporting on a couple of years ago, it's crazy to me how similar this event was to the plans that they had already had. So they have these plans that were, in theory, designed by a prophet named Siener van Dredsberg in the early 20th century, who predicted a civil war between the races and that a kind of reassertion of a white free state in South Africa. And they've been planning for that for a long time. But, what one thing that, I'll say on your podcast that I wouldn't say on the news that kind of struck me was that, like, they have contacts in South African intelligence, right? And they know things, excuse me. They know things, via some means that I'm not always sure how they get their information. And it almost seems to me like the eerie similarities might be because there was some level of insurrection planning done by some people within the South African government and security services, and they had been slipping those plans, or somehow the white militias became aware of that, because it is kind of to point by point creepily similar, at least to the plans of some white militias. And the odd thing is that the white militias didn't make a lot of noise during all this. And I think that is largely because white communities were mostly untouched. And following from that, white communities were mostly untouched because white communities have been in large part mobilized for a long time. And, I'm thinking of some areas that I've been that were pretty near some areas where violence broke out, particularly in Gauteng. And, good job on those leaders for avoiding those areas. Cause like I've seen the people who are involved with that, and they are hardcore. And like many of them will talk to you directly about people they have killed. And these are people who grew up, after the violence at the end of apartheid, who never served in the South African army. They just grew up in this zone of we defend our communities, and we've been armed since we were kids. And so I think that in terms of like the kind of sexy big noise kind of moves of like, oh, this is the time for whites to retreat to the desert. Oh, this is the time, where we're going to actually like launch an uprising and reclaim white power, or, try to carve out some free province of South Africa as a redoubt and white homeland. I don't think that would be necessarily set off too much by these recent events, if only because a lot of whites weren't really that touched by it. They're very scared, and they're very, it confirms a lot of what they've long been saying, and it's going to drive very, very certainly, it's going to drive lots of whites further into the kind of soft white nationalist mindset that now grips a lot of people who in earlier years would have been considered South African liberals, but have looked on with increasing alarm and like increasing kind of white identification as South Africa's gotten more violent, as democracy continues not to work, and have started saying, hey, we're going to take care of our lives, our networks, our people on our own. And I've talked to a couple Anglophones who are traditionally, sort of far less white nationalist, at least in their public presentation, than the Afrikaner community. And it is striking to see how you could call it casual racism. You could call it a certain level of realism about like their people with stuff and money and nice homes and nice cars in a increasingly violent society. But where they have increasingly started to talk like, hey, we're a white community under threat, and we as whites must think about how to forge a white future on the southern tip of Africa. And I think people always thought like that, but it's become much more unavoidable to hear people talking like that. I remember, this was a couple years ago, but I remember Ryan Mallon, who is super famous for writing this book, A Trader's Heart, which is sort of like this kind of grand document of an Afrikaner who was trying to be a liberal and trying to believe in a diverse South Africa. And he called himself a traitor because he was a traitor to his, governing Afrikaner ideology. And he's writing op-eds where he talks about feeling like Anne Frank. He talks about feeling like there's a looming Holocaust. And that to me was really striking. This is a guy who made his name as what in South Africa is called a liberal, which is basically a white person who believes in diversity. And I think I don't know the guy, but judging from his op-eds, I think if you looked in his heart of hearts, he's starting to think like, well, white people got to do for white people. And that's a really alarming change. And it's happened pretty quickly. I mean, it happened largely, it started with the land question, and this is going to really, really drive it forward.
And what about on the other side of things? So, obviously, there's a lot of black people are fighting right now within all these clashes. There must be people kind of forming their own militias on that side, no?
Oh, absolutely. But white people have militias, black people have gangs, right? That's how people talk about it. And it's a silly shorthand that journalists seem to never endingly repeat. But so, what is a gang and what is a militia? It's frequently just the difference between what color skin the person has when they join it. But so, they're particularly South African black life is run through with what, if white people had them, would be called militias. And this is stuff, from anything organized taxi groups, which are extremely powerful and very, very armed and militant in South Africa. And so for example, one of the guys who is alleged to have helped organize this insurrection was forced by the taxi union to tour some of the looting damage, and was basically extorted to go there because he was scared of them. There are videos of it. He looks really, really uncomfortable. And so the taxi drivers, for example, were major figures in actually blocking a lot of the looting. They organized themselves into an armed group that stopped people from looting certain areas. So the taxi drivers are one. There are these people called zamazamas who are basically ad hoc gold miners. And that's a brutal, crazy world of people who go down in abandoned mine shafts for months and months to look for the scraps from shut down mines. And it's incredibly dangerous. And, the zamazamas, even in the area, immediately around Johannesburg, you see them when there's a funeral of a zamazama, a major one, you'll see guys, with polished AKs, and fancy cars, and they'll do big processions and have huge parties. And those people, to some degree, you can call them just pure criminals, but on another level, they're essentially an armed trade group of ad hoc people, and they are deeply involved with politics. Those people, all of these politicians solicit and find gangsters and, criminal figures and underworld figures, and from the highest levels of South African society all the way down. And they make links with them, and very frequently it's hard to tell the difference between, ANC people and pure gangsters. And so that's a long way of saying that, I don't think it's a question of whether in kind of the vast black majority of South Africa, there are going to be militias. I think that militias are very, very much a presence, and they're already something that has existed for a long time. It's just we don't call them that. Last little bit that is kind of interesting is that I think a lot of people don't realize how much you could call it xenophobia. You could call it, I mean, I guess it's not racism because it's intra-racial, but how much like kind of ethnic dislike and dislike of foreigners there is running through a lot of South African society. And so the MK, the former ANC military wing groups, those have long been accused of operating along the N3 motorway and targeting particularly foreign truck drivers. And they've long been accused of just like pure xenophobic violence against, and they're not the only people who do this, but xenophobic violence against, migrants from other parts of Southern Africa, who are a huge population in South Africa. Millions upon millions of people have come there over the years. And there's a lot of hatred, a lot. I should have mentioned this earlier, a lot of the violence in KZN was directed from Black people at Black foreigners.
How like what's the main issue there then?
Well, I mean, it's sort of like here in the States, you have this porous border. You have millions of people crossing all the time. They're generally poor. They're almost always poor. And straight up, they take jobs and depress wages. I know that's controversial to say, but like when you have unrestricted migration from people who are willing to work for half, it's going to create some resentment. And, I've spoken to I've spoken to a number of white guys who, run farms and stuff who just won't hire South Africans anymore because they call them Zim guys, they'll work for so hard. And like those guys, like, they're just like, we won't hire South Africans because why on earth would we? We can get this Zimbabwean who's fleeing desperate poverty, who we can get to work 12 hours a day for, a half to a third of, I might be overstating the difference, but for significantly less than a South African worker would work for. And you have a basic problem in South Africa. There's too many people and too few places to live. And I mean that on a basic level of like, there are, to some degree, there's not enough open space for people to literally put a shack on, right? Which is, we can go into that too, but is the other great defining South African political question of how and whether or not to redistribute land. And then you add in anywhere from 10 to, 20 million. It's hard to get an estimate. Some people have very, very high estimates of how many people have flooded across the border over the recent decades. And that makes that problem much worse. And it makes competition for literally just like a place to have a home and like get a little mealy meal and eat your dinner at night. Like it does intensify a feeling of competition. And as far as the xenophobic violence in KZN in this recent bout, the government pointed to this in its initial kind of take on the violence when it accused basically Zuma of sparking a quote unquote ethnic mobilization. And I think, at least from what I have been able to tell, and perhaps somebody who's listening to this will know better than I do, but as far as I can tell, this wasn't some kind of organized pogrom. It was more street level animosities playing out in an ad hoc way. That impression that I have, though, may turn out to be wrong. It may turn out that there were organized pogroms, and it would not surprise me in the slightest. That wouldn't be unheard of at all in South Africa. So
going forward then, what do you think is the most likely scenario right now? Do you think this is going to devolve into more violence, maybe even a civil war? I don't know. Where do you see this heading right now?
A lot of Black radicals who I have spoken to would make the point that South Africa, at least for Black people, is already in a civil war. It's a civil war that takes place between so many actors and with so many opaque motivations that, it's hard for particularly outside observers to get a handle on or name. So, I mean, that's a kind of sophist interpretation, but like, I think it's important for people to remember that South Africa is already incredibly violent, and that this was a massive, massive burst of particularly property damage and organized. Maybe it was sabotage, maybe it was something a little more complicated, but, organized violence on some level. But people die in great numbers in South Africa every year. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people die in South African violence all the time. And when you ask if there's going to be a civil war, my first kind of reaction to that, which I don't want to go too far with, but I almost was thinking, like, you almost wish that the conditions for a civil war existed in South Africa, because at least then there would be some kind of way of imagining a path out of the chaos that it is in. It would be possible to kind of identify discrete power bases and discrete entities that could theoretically gain control of the chaos that this country is devolving into. And that's not present. And obviously I don't really want a civil war, but like the kind of organized, discrete structures that could credibly organize themselves in opposition to each other to make the kind of thing that, a Westerner would think of as a civil war isn't really there. What is there is a power struggle within the ANC, between the clique that has coalesced around Ramaphosa, who, will continue to suggest that the next steps forward are, keep these corruption inquiries going, keep building good governance structures. I think South Africa still needs to renegotiate a deal with the IMF, keep attracting foreign investment and kind of move forward with the same, more or less the same neoliberal model that has existed both in South Africa and, basically been foisted on the entire world for the last very long time. As far as the opposition to that, the closest thing to something that you could put a name to is this radical economic transformation faction of the ANC. And it's honestly incredibly depressing. It's incredibly depressing to me because the stated goals of the RET faction are things that actually, I think, on some level could save South Africa. South Africa is a place that, I said this to you before, but these are problems that were created by the fact that the revolution didn't get finished there. And anywhere where you have a revolution that doesn't achieve its kind of the aims that sparked it, you have this lingering kind of political disease that kind of infects a society. And, from America, where it's like you have a revolution to build, democratic political equality, but you don't give it to Black people, that has infected our country for 300 years, 250 years, whatever. In Ireland, you were supposed to build an Ireland that was united, Gaelic, free, and socialist. Well, to some degree, none of that happened. And Ireland's been dealing with the consequences and been dealing with violence and upheaval ever since. And South Africa, the promise was not, hey, we're going to have a democracy where Black people control, for example, 23% of the value of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and where 75%, if not more, of the land is still owned by whites, and where great numbers of people who committed brutal crimes and oppressed the country for almost a century, get off scot-free. Like, that was not the plan. And as much as, 1994 is this moment of like great hope and optimism and excitement, like, I think the average South African has experienced something where they're almost as excluded from the South African economy, many people are, as they were during apartheid. And they have seen a class of often quite corrupt people emerge and become incredibly wealthy by leveraging political connections. And they've seen, essentially a white class of billionaires and, a gang surrounding the area of Stellenbosch in the Cape, remain the billionaires and remain, sort of the richest people in South Africa. And so what the RET faction is proposing is, things like renationalizing sold off state industries, making the state into, the employer of last resort, creating possibly a universal basic income, leveraging the power of the state to improve the healthcare, things like this, right? That's their stated goal. And something like that accomplishment of the redistributive aims of the South African Revolution would probably be a way to get out of all of this if it was possible. The problem is that the people who are pushing that are, fucking buffoons, and they're fucking corrupt, and they're gangsters. And we didn't even go into why Zuma is in prison in the first place. But the short version of it is that he basically gave away the state to this family of, former computer shop owners named the Guptas, who are now, living comfortably in Dubai, and gave away the state in a degree that's almost, I think, unimaginable to many people who think of South Africa as a modern major democracy. Which,
when you say gave away the state, what do you mean by that?
So I'll give you examples. So Zuma's son, at one point, brought in a deputy finance minister and said, okay, if you want, we will pay you X number of hundreds of millions of dollars and you take over the finance ministry. But you got to play ball with us. And the Guptas, this family that rose to absolutely sudden wealth, they're Indian, which helped to, has done nothing for sort of racial relations in South Africa, or the image people have of Indians in South Africa, which is unfortunate. But the Guptas are in that meeting. The Guptas are there handing away the finance ministry of a major international power. One of the biggest powers in Africa. The Guptas, one of the things they did was they forced the South African state airline to cancel an air route to, I think, Mumbai, because they owned a competing shitty airline, and they didn't want South African airlines competing with their customers. So they would just do stuff like that, like levers of power over the state that went from the absolutely minor questions of how to run a not very good airline to the highest functionings of an international market economy. And they reached, it wasn't just Zuma. It was not by any means just Zuma. And so Ace Mahashule, who is currently the Secretary General of the ANC. His son had a sinecure job with the Guptas. And he's closely linked with Zuma, and he's probably going to get expelled. But this rot went very deep. The extremely well-respected and kind of much beloved by the international community former finance minister, Nene, he's somebody who is so beloved by international markets that you'll see, when it was proposed that he was going to come back to the finance ministry, the South African rand shot up in value. And then 3 months into, I'm not sure how many months, but a very short time into his tenure as finance minister under Ramaphosa, not Zuma, it emerged that he had met with the Guptas, and he was out, almost instantly. And their corruption of the state, it's taken forever to piece apart. And that's a lot of what this kind of commission that eventually led to Zuma's arrest is investigating. But I illustrate this because, unfortunately, the radical economic transformation clique, which presents itself as these tribunes of the people, and they're gonna redistribute wealth, and they're gonna reorient the state towards common people, and they're gonna, to some degree, save South Africa. These people are not gonna do that. They don't give a flying fuck about the average South African, at least on the evidence of what they have done. And it's really unfortunate because it's co-opted what could be an actual political mobilization for redistributive policies. It's made everybody who pushes those look like a radical economic transformation buffoon. And, to give a really good example that I think people who are kind of interested in the kind of nitty gritty details of international policy and dark dealings and stuff, Zuma often portrays himself, as do many of the kind of self-appointed tribunes of the South African common people. He often portrays himself as this kind of crusader against quote unquote white monopoly capital, right? And so that, and that's a phrase that's directed at the legacy rich families of, the apartheid era, like the Oppenheimers who were involved in De Beers and, mining magnates and things like that, right? But so the way that white monopoly capital became a phrase of like particular salience and like intense political division in South Africa is in part, not entirely, but in part because the Guptas hired a British, which you probably know about these people, a British PR firm called Bell Pottinger, it's almost unbelievable. They hired them to fan black rage against white monopoly capital as a way of buttressing Zuma's portrayal of himself as a tribune of the people and ensuring that the Guptas and Zuma and that gang of absolutely corrupt, nefarious, I don't like to call them buffoons because they're not. They're too smart to be buffoons. They're very good at what they do, but what they do is destroy a state and rob a people. And Bell Pottinger did this. They pushed these absolutely wealthy guys from London are out there pushing like black rage on the internet against white monopoly capital. And this is what I'm trying to illustrate. It's like you get these people who are saying good stuff in theory, who are saying these things about how they want to help the South African people. But if you look at actually what they do, it's almost unbelievably nefarious, and like the stuff that these people touch is inevitably destroyed. Bell Pottinger was destroyed by its association with the Guptas, this venerable firm. But as far as consequences within South Africa, they have not emerged. To Ramaphosa's credit, and I know I talk bad about him a lot, I'm not a fan, but to his credit, he has pushed the anti-corruption thing really hard. And he is, I know I said before that he is a figure who's engaged in this kind of like weird, soft trafficking in party influence to make himself fabulously wealthy. And he is one of the wealthiest men in South Africa. But he has pushed the corruption stuff hard. And I think it was a surprise to many that that the Constitutional Court felt that it was in a position to have Zuma arrested. I think it was a surprise to many that Zuma allowed himself to be arrested. And I don't think he would have done so if it hadn't been for his ex-wife, who narrowly lost the last party competition to gain the ANC presidency, and who's a very strong, perhaps stronger-willed and more effective politician even than Zuma in some ways. But this faction has no legitimacy except for this kind of almost, African, people would always describe it, because it's America and we can only think about America, this kind of Trumpian, like just unconditional loyalty that Zuma inspires in some people. Outside of that, his faction, the ANC, is essentially without power, and it's essentially without any kind of legitimacy. And that's really unfortunate because the rest of the ANC, the kind of more proper side that is asserting itself now against the Zuma faction, also lacks a lot of legitimacy, particularly among the poor and more radical populace. And so it's really hard to say where this could go because there isn't someone who's equipped to lead or unite the country.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's going to a very good place. Is there anything else you think we should mention before we wrap this one up, mate?
I just want people, when they think of South Africa, to kind of, honestly, I mean, it's a funny thing, but I kind of want people to remember that, like, there is something in this liberation movement project that could have been really, really cool. And it could have, like, the vision behind it was really amazing, but it's not the vision that they put forth, you know, kind of in the story that we read in our, you know, school books and things like that, of this kind of happy, everybody's fine, we have democracy now. And I think the real lesson is that, you know, some people who needed to feel economic and perhaps even, you know, prison pain in order to heal this country didn't. And that is going to have to happen, whether people don't like to hear it, but it's going to have to happen. And there's going to have to be some scores settled that are still lingering if this is going to work out.
Yeah, man, definitely. I hope they do work it out. It's a very fragile situation by the sound of it. Where can people find you online, mate, if they want to read your work, particularly on South Africa and elsewhere?
Well, so particularly on South Africa, you can check out, I'm a contributing editor at Harper's, and you can look me up, James Pogue, South Africa Harper's. I got a long piece on there that was backed by the Pulitzer Center. I think it was pretty good. Check it out. Otherwise, yeah, you can check me out on Twitter. I'm James Pogue, J Henson Pogue is my handle. And yeah, I got another piece coming out, hopefully pretty soon. That's kind of wild, about a jiu-jitsu militia leader who is taking over the county government of an area in Northern California and trying to spark a rural rebellion. So kind of some weird way. Should be fun. And so yeah, check that out when it comes out.
Definitely check out Chosen Country, James's book. Very good.
Yeah, do that. Buy
it. All right, man. Thanks very much, mate. Appreciate that.
Man, pleasure as always. Take it easy.
That was James Pogue speaking about the clashes in South Africa. Definitely check out James's work, especially his book, Chosen Country. It's absolutely brilliant. Really, really good work. If you want Popular Front to keep growing, want us to keep moving, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront, or you can go to popularfront.co/support. Thank you to our sponsors in this episode. They are Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee business selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. The episode is also sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. One in South, one in West. Find them on socials at Grindcore House. Stop in, tell them Popular Front sent you. The episode is also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and writing about historical conflict propaganda from around the world. Buy prints at propagandopolis.com. Use the promo code PopularFront10 for 10% off. Also, check out the series we're doing with them. There's a special line of Popular Front prints that is at propagandopolis.com. propagandopolis.com. You'll see it on the top of the header on the banner image of the website. There's a section all for the Popular Front prints. This episode is mixed and mastered by Splicing Block. Definitely check them out. Just search for Splicing Block Podcasts. Thank you very much to them. If you want to follow us on socials, go to YouTube, youtube.com/popularfront. The Instagram is instagram.com/popular.front, or the backup is popularfront_. Twitter, twitter.com/popularfrontco. And again, the website, www.popularfront.co. If you want to support us, if you want bonus episodes, all of that, go to patreon.com/popularfront. Thank you very much to the high tier Patreons. They are Udoye Travis, Tom Petrie, James Leons, Kate, Ellen, Dan Ross, Thumper, Lisa Milgram, Lupita Valens, Bradley Davies, Brendan Crave, Pete Hesher, RX, A. Nickel, Travis Lieberman, Cherry, Ben Marshall, Dallas Dunn, LD50 Seattle, MJ, Meredith Waters, Adam H, Larson 8669, Karante, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamondstein, Jacob, Michael O'Connor, Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, Alexander, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Ian Froese, James Colley, Tynan Daly, Michael Akakan, Ethan, Fitz Madrid, Ed Coulthard, Clayton Taylor, Mike Barone, Ben, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Jojo Arani, DR, Trey Nance, Amy R, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Nawaiz, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Moody Al-Rashid, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, JL, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarak, Dan Dunham, The Greg, Chad Walker, Diana Gourvenek, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, and Moritz Zumbul. Thank you all so much. If you want to support us, again, go to patreon.com/popularfront. Music in this episode, as always, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black. Check his music out at samblackpf.com.